Oh, to be young and in my 20s again, people say. These people may be your mom, your grandpa, some random person you're talking to at the grocery store for some reason. And sometimes I get what they mean. I'm in great health, except for when I've been randomly having allergic reactions, specifically on my eyelids in the past few weeks, and I don't know why. And I have nothing tying me down necessarily, but what about literally everything else? You're jealous of me, I'm jealous of you. You literally own a house. I probably will never get to do that. If you couldn't tell, I'm in my 20s. I'm 24, and recently I've been feeling very lost. Very, very lost. I've been plagued a lot by nostalgia, how everything seems to just be getting shittier as the years go on, and to top it all off, being pushed this lie that everything is actually great. I think to understand why we feel like our 20s are so confusing and bleak, we have to look at the past. I grew up in the early 2000s. I was an avid fan of the Disney Channel, and then when I got older, I was still an avid fan of the Disney Channel, but this time, it was a little bit weird. Either way, as a kid and a teen, I watched a lot of movies and TV shows. This media obviously had a huge impact on my life and influenced how I interacted with the world around me. What I love about children's media is that when a problem happens, you lean on your friends and family around you to get through the problem, and there's a simple solution at the end. Except, obviously, as you get older, you realize that that doesn't happen. And don't get me wrong, I do not want children's media to become more realistic at all, actually. If anything, I want more children's media that is perpetuating the idea that life is joyful. I don't want a bunch of nihilistic children running around. But since I'm not a child anymore, every time I go back to this media, it just reminds me of a time when I believed that every problem could really be solved and that all my goals could be achieved. Then my screen turns off and I roll over and I think about how I'm not really sure if I'm ever gonna have job security, and then I go to bed. Anyone who's an adult understands this though. This is definitely not a unique feeling, but it doesn't mean that I have to like it. I've seen a phrase floating around on social media and it's called death by nostalgia. Usually these types of comments reside under videos of like a old childhood bedroom with the sound of crickets in the nighttime and warm summer. And boy, does it get me every single time. Where I think nostalgia hits so hard in your 20s is that you're just out of reach of your childhood. Maybe you were only a kid or teen about 10 years ago, so the memories are just so vivid, but you can't reach them. That time has gone. While this content from my childhood never fails to make me extremely emotional, I want to go a little bit further back to a time when I wasn't even alive. Recently, I've been half joking, half not joking, thinking to myself, I was born in the wrong generation. Let me explain. In each era before us, we can observe a distinct culture of the time. Not saying these past eras were great or perfect by any means, you know, due to inequality with literally anyone who wasn't a white man, but comparatively to how I feel today, these generations before us had such a distinct culture that we, even though I wasn't ever born in like the 70s, for example, I still get to listen to the music, experience the art, a whole plethora of things and ideas that I feel like we are not really cultivating in our culture today. In the 60s, we saw cultural shifts, the rise of rock and roll, and the emergence of the hippie culture. In the 90s, it was grunge music, the golden era of hip-hop, and technology advancements that actually seemed to be helping us. Then we hit the 2010s. There's still some distinction in my mind about this time, but it's definitely not as strong as the eras before. Yes, we had Snapchat goggles and gay marriage was legalized, but why when I was writing this did I think of the Snapchat goggles before I remembered that gay marriage was legalized? But if we follow this trend where it seems like we're forgetting more and more, what does this mean for our current era? The absolute grip social media has on our lives has only gotten worse since the 2010s. Not to mention our political climate right now. If American democracy doesn't cease to exist within the next few months, I don't think that we'll be looking back on this time very fondly. Nostalgia relies on experience, but if every culturally significant thing we've experienced recently is happening through our phones, we're just going to forget it like the TikToks we watch in the morning when we're sitting on the toilet. Obviously, as individuals, we'll still be nostalgic for personal experiences, times we've had with friends, family, but overall as a whole, I feel like there are a few things that actually tie us all together. And I feel this way for a few reasons. Let's start with music. While we still have amazing music coming out each year, there has been a takeover of the style somewhat coined as TikTok music. Essentially, this music is created with the intention of having one catchy line that blows up on social media, catapulting the artist's streams, and then making the people a lot of money. I find this interesting because sometimes this happens without the artist even intending for it to happen, but where I find it really interesting is when I'm scrolling on the apps or listening to music in general, and I hear a line. And you can just tell that this line was the only one that had any intention put into it, and that intention was the 30 seconds that are somewhat vague enough that people can apply it to any situation they feel could be relatable on social media. I do think that you can be nostalgic for this music though. Every time I hear did a full 180, it doesn't even make me think about my college dorm. But where I think it loses its cultural impact and longevity is that I don't even know the rest of that song. Gun to my head, I could not tell you the next minute of that song. I don't even know where it is in the song. There could not even be a minute after that. I have literally no clue. And with this type of music becoming more popular, it makes it harder to connect with artists' music in an authentic way. I think this, combined with how independent artists aren't able to reach audiences the same way they were in the past, just perpetuates us to listen to more inauthentic music. I'm not saying we don't have good music or artists anymore, because we definitely do. I'm not going that boomer on you guys. But music made to push dreams over one catchy line won't hold the same historical significance as songs written with the intention of protest or just explaining what it's like to be alive at this time. If we're forgetting the most popular songs of this era because we only know the 30-second bridge, then we're also forgetting important parts of history. Technology. I'm going to keep this one brief. We've seen the rise of popularity in using old technology, such as using digital cameras or using dumb phones, which a dumb phone is basically just like you can call, maybe you can text, and like listen to music, and that's it. Like use your calendar, but doesn't have social media on it. And I think a reason a lot of people do this is because it does spark nostalgia in a good way. It reminds you of simpler times and makes you more present in your everyday life. But then on the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to technology trends, we have the AI takeover. The reason I said this section was going to be brief is because I don't think there's a realm of possibility that anyone will ever feel nostalgic for AI. AI quite literally takes the experience out of the whole experience. There's a lot of videos about like AI being bad, so I don't feel like harping on it, but you can go watch some of those after you finish this video. Thank you. Home design and graphic design. I'm not going to be making waves here by saying that why the hell does everything look the same now? Home design, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to encapsulate an era. For example, in the 70s, we had sunken living rooms, eclectic colors, furniture that was unique and actually was made with good quality material, so that didn't just fall apart after you used it for like a year. If I showed you pictures of houses from different eras, it's likely that you'd be able to identify which one each one is from. And now in the 2020s, we have fucking boxes. Like, a part of what inspired this section of the video is where I grew up, the neighborhood surrounding us has been expanding multiple upon multiple of new homes. There's nothing wrong with new homes as new families are moving in. But me and my mother, let's just say me and my mother enjoy taking walks. And we enjoy taking walks in these neighborhoods that are partially built. And then also sometimes we may enjoy going into these houses when they are in the middle of being built, when construction is halted, and just taking a look around to see what's happening in there. And let me tell you, the quality of some of these homes feels like you're walking into a plastic playhouse. I don't know anything about building homes. I'm not gonna say that I do. But walking into these places, I can visibly see the lack of quality. A lack of quality wood, brick, texture on finishes. How can a whole house be made of shingles and plywood? Like, make it make sense. Something that I've always appreciated is that if you go to different areas around the country, all the homes look different. Townhomes in Philly look different than New York brownstones. Houses in California look different than houses in Florida. But now in all of these areas from all across the country, we are seeing the popping up of soulless apartment complexes. I'll always feel nostalgic when I go into the city of Pittsburgh, which is the area that I'm from, being able to drive through the cities, admiring these homes that seemed untouched from generations before. And then suddenly my nostalgic viewing is rudely interrupted by ugly ass soulless building number 200. Aside from the actual construction of these buildings, which is just a minor point in the bigger point I'm trying to make, I don't know if people want to be feeling like they're living in a hotel or that quality furniture is just so unattainable for most people to buy because it's so expensive, but it just makes me sad. There's so much personality in someone's home, and if no one can afford to buy pieces that we really enjoy, then we're all just gonna end up with IKEA ad looking ass bedrooms. Actually, not even IKEA, more like Temu home decor page looking bedrooms. And where I tie this point in with nostalgia is that even though people's homes were unique, in the past there was a certain quality and style that typically transcended through everyone's home. Because the quality of furniture was so much better, it made it easier to see distinct eras of furniture, where now most of our furniture will probably just get thrown away. While this is not the most important thing in the world, I do really love looking at old homes, and I want to in the future be able to look at old homes the homes we have now and have an appreciation for the design and the construction. But I fear more and more homes are going to be torn down and replaced by the soulless apartment complexes. Now let's talk about some graphic design. I would say most of the design we've been seeing recently is this sleek black and white text, minimalistic style, and also that corporate artwork, which is like the very round looking little people that are practically everywhere for some reason. Which maybe this will be our era's defining style of graphic design and advertisement, but it's so boring. Oh my god. Where's all the fun? Where's all the color? Where are all the advertisements to sell something that solves a problem that we didn't even really have before?
Everybody loves bacon. The sizzle, the scent, the mouth-watering taste. Didn't think it could get any better? Watch. We're turning bacon upside down. Introducing Bacon Bowl.
I wouldn't say that I'm nostalgic for advertisements necessarily, but I do get a little sad when I see someone repost one from the early 2000s on TikTok and I'm like, I remember watching that when I was staying up too late past my bedtime. I'm curious though, because I don't really have access to a child, so I can't really have anyone to ask this question to. But do kids these days have like silly commercials? Or are all the advertisements they see just discrete ads that are in like a Fortnite video and they don't even really know that it's an ad? Don't know exactly what my point with this advertisement section is because I don't really want ads. I would prefer not to see them actually. But maybe if I'm being forced to look at ads for like 30% of my day, I want them to be at least a little bit interesting. So with all that said, what does this mean for nostalgia? Will we be nostalgic for this era's music, technology, design? Even if it's objectively worse and more forgettable than the eras of the past? Or will it all just keep blending and changing so rapidly that we just constantly feel like we're in the now? We just hit the mid-20s, and sometimes it can be harder to see the bigger picture when you're still painting it, but I feel like I should be able to distinguish something from the past 5 years that isn't just COVID and how everything is an app now. Please God, let me hold a menu when I'm ordering my food. I don't know. I just feel like it's making me feel a little bit more pessimistic about my future if I have less to look back on fondly. Being in your 20s is a confusing and turbulent time. However, I must say that I find myself super lucky that while I do have problems and they can feel like they are horrible and that my world is just spinning upside down, however, I don't have to worry about problems that are actively threatening my life or livelihood. I can't imagine being in my 20s and also being faced with homelessness or addiction. So while I may be somewhat complaining in the next part of this video, I don't want it to be taken that I'm ungrateful. I just want to point that out before I go further because I know that some people have it worse from me, but also I don't think that diminishes my problems I have in my own life. Now back to me complaining. Some people of the older generation or society as a whole have this unrealistic idea of what someone should be doing in their 20s, which then makes everyone in their 20s feel like they're epically failing because they're not living up to this expectation. This is a reminder only made worse by social media. Having the ability to compare yourself to the lives of people who have their shit way more together than you do, or at least they appear like they have their shit way more together than you do. And it's even worse when they're younger than you. Comparison is the thief of joy, but I think a lot of people can't avoid the feeling that they should have the perfect job or a great relationship. The cost of housing is increasing while wages stay similar. College feels almost like a necessity to have a career, but then at the same time will put you into mountains of debt that'll take you years to pay off. And now we have the loneliness epidemic. In 1990, around the time when my parents bought their house, it was more typical, not totally typical, but more typical for only one person in a partnership to work while the other person would be able to stay home and still afford a house and maybe even afford a child. But now most couples, even if they both work, still seemingly can't afford to buy a house. And that's not even considering people that are single, like no fucking shot you're being able to buy a house unless you make a lot of money. I was gonna try and insert some statistics here, but do I really need to put some numbers on the screen for you to agree that Americans are astronomically down bad when it comes to money right now? I don't think so. And even without statistics to depress me, I feel like my parents' generation and the generations before could rely on this idea that if you work hard enough and stick to it, that eventually you could hit these basic milestones like buying a house or starting a family. But I feel like now, even if it's a pessimistic mindset, that I can't rely on this idea that if I try hard, life will work out for me. Maybe what bothers me the most about this idea is that I really feel like there's no sense of security anymore. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but the anxiety that I get get when I call out of work or decide not to do a freelance project because I have other commitments already, the anxiety is lethal because I can't help but wonder that, oh, in the future, maybe I'm gonna need that $100 that I could have made working that random Tuesday, or that, oh, if I would have taken that project, maybe it would have opened me up to new opportunities that I would finally be able to get a steady, stable job. I'm just constantly in the state of feeling that everything that I've worked for is one day just going to randomly come to a halt, and that the rug is going to be ripped underneath me. I've seen just the other day people making videos talking about how degree they studied their whole life for, that their funding was cut, and now it's like, figure something else out. Like, that's mind-blowing to me that it can just be taken away, even if you've worked so hard. At this point in my life, I'm not working towards buying a house. I'm working towards one day having an apartment with in-unit laundry so that I don't have to worry about my neighbors taking out my laundry mid-dry cycle and leaving it on the top. And yet, with all that in mind, maybe I was just stuck in my own bubble of naivete. Maybe this construct of what I believed I should be accomplishing right now was just as false as the TV shows I watched as a kid. Sorry for the abrupt jump. I didn't really know how to end that section, to be quite honest. So here we're on to the next. I think the loneliness epidemic and social media go hand in hand when it comes to people in their 20s. So typically the loneliness epidemic is talked about when we talk about the male loneliness epidemic. I don't really want to focus on the male loneliness epidemic too much because, one, I'm not a man, so I can't really give a first-hand experience account of how I feel about it. And also, sometimes the male loneliness epidemic conversation can totter into conversations about incel culture, or how in general men are underperforming when it comes to women in a lot of areas of life, which then makes men feel like they're failing and insecure, which, to be honest, I don't exactly have a ton of man friends, not intentionally. I would love to have more guy friends, but it's just kind of like how it's happened. So because of all of that in mind, I don't think I would have a particular sensitivity to talk about the male loneliness epidemic that would be needed to talk about it. It's no surprise that it's been proven that people feel lonelier than they've ever felt before, and that loneliness has only progressed since COVID. There's so many factors that play into this though, from people not having the time or energy to hang out with their friends or connect with significant others, people having disabilities or health issues that keep them isolated in their homes. But what I think is most common for most people when it comes to loneliness is the involvement that social media has to perpetuate this loneliness. In a US-based study, participants who reported using social media for more than 2 hours a day had about double the odds of reporting increased perceptions of social isolation compared to those who use social media for less than 30 minutes per day. In that study that I cited, which is actually very interesting, if you want to go check it out, I have a link down below. In that study, the author mentioned how technology displaces in-person engagement, monopolizes our attention, reduces the quality of our interactions, and even diminishes our self-esteem. I think most people could conclude this on their own just from being online. But where it concerns me the most is we exist in a world now that it almost feels like you don't have a choice to engage with social media and technology. So how does this loneliness fit into my 20-something conundrum? Well, being in your 20s is already a very lonely time. For some people, it's the first time you move away from home. For others, you might still live in the city you grew up in, but you're less reliant on your family now. And while social media is a great way to stay connected, it doesn't replace the personal connections you have in your real life, and I think sometimes we forget that. In generations before, while it was still difficult to make friends in a new city, it didn't feel as impossible as it does now. And why do I make that claim? Because literally everyone I know has had a parent or just an older person in general tell them how they just need to get out there. Just get out there, you'll meet a boyfriend, you'll make some friends. Which makes sense they would say that because when they were younger, that's exactly how you did it. But now that's not so common anymore. My friend recently told me after she took a flight that her mom told her before she went to the airport that she should look nice in case she meets someone there, romantically, on the airplane, because her mom met one of her boyfriends on an airplane. And maybe that can still happen, but I don't think I've ever even spoken to someone on an airplane, to be quite honest, aside from like the flight attendant and maybe the person next to me for like 1 second when I had to go to the bathroom or something. It's just not that easy. There's a common consensus I've been seeing online right now that we just need more third spaces. But the thing is, you actually need to go to the third space to, keep the third space alive and also to contribute to the third space community, which people don't do because they feel too awkward to. A few months ago, I was at work and this girl came in and she was looking to see if we had community groups. I'm trying not to give away where I work, but community groups like some of the other businesses in our area had. I told her no, but then we got to talking and she explained that she was new to the area and that she wanted to make some friends. So even though I felt kind of weird about it, I gave this random girl my Instagram and then we ended up hanging out and having a really good time. Yeah, it was kind of awkward, but also it was pretty fun. Eventually she ended up moving away and we haven't really kept in contact, you could say, but it was still fun to meet someone in the wild and hang out with them. My point of that story isn't to flex like, oh, you're all losers, I can make friends, because no, I think that was like one of the only people in the last 5 years that I've met like that I didn't have any prior connection to, and then we hung out. But instead I tell it as a word of encouragement that it is possible to meet someone and become friends with them in the wild. It's a two-way street though. You have to be willing to put yourself out there as much as you have to be willing to accept someone who is putting themselves out there. It's just frustrating to see when people do go out in public with the intention of making friends and then literally no one gives them the time of day, so then they end up just going home and going back to their phone and their comfort because clearly no one wants to be friends in the real world anymore. I also think sometimes people don't realize how much social interaction they're lacking because they spend so much time on their phone and they feel like they're getting that social interaction even though they're not. I'm not talking about like online friends there because that's obviously social interaction, but I mean like just scrolling and watching videos of people and feeling like that parasocial relationship with them. Growing up in an internet generation, I sometimes worry what would happen if I did cut social media out of my life because I think it would feel like I was cutting out one of my main sources of social interaction. But being young and alive, I think I need to let that idea go. Even if it means having to talk to my friends less on a daily basis, I think that would be better for our relationship in general because we would have to call each other and be more intentional with the time we spend with each other rather than taking it for granted because, oh, I can just send them a text about this later. Now, if I'm talking about loneliness and loneliness in your 20s, of course I have to talk about dating. While I am currently not involved in the dating scene at this exact moment, I have definitely been deep in the trenches before. Deep in the trenches. When it comes to dating in your 20s, especially in 2025, that most people are primarily meeting other romantic interests through dating apps. Do I think this is bad? No, like I know people that have met their partner through online dating apps and they're a great fit for each other. But I also think as a whole, the way that our generation goes at online dating is where it gets a little bit fuzzy if like this is like a very helpful or good thing to be doing. We've all seen the memes of people being like, why does everyone on my Hinge look so fucking ugly and stupid looking and they're fucking ugly and I hate which I do giggle at those from time to time. But then when I think about it a little bit longer, it just kind of makes me sad. While people in your Hinge likes, you might not be interested in them in person either, but they're also just people who are looking for love. Okay, maybe not always looking for love, but I just tell myself that because of my romantic heart. I feel like usually they're not always looking for love, but we'll pretend they're all looking for love. Either way, dating apps have just made us extremely superficial, and there's not really another way to do it. I mean, you're superficial when you meet people in person as well, but in person you will give someone the benefit of a doubt usually. Rather on online, you see an ugly person and you're like, that's X. And then you never think about them again, which is fine, I guess, but I think it kind of warps your mind at how you should be, approaching these people that you would potentially want to date. Either way, dating apps have made dating just extremely casual. And I'm not talking about casual dating, I'm talking about how dating has become lazy almost. I know in the past, I would spend hours swiping, not even really looking or thinking about the people that I was going past, while simultaneously having this expectation that I was going to meet some great person on these apps that I was giving little to no attention to, but expecting the best from, like bad expectations there. But these dating apps, because they're online, they give us this feeling that we're actually doing something, trying to date, when you're actually doing nothing, so you feel like you're failing at dating even though you haven't even really tried dating, to be quite honest. I know not everyone treats dating apps like this, but it just makes me feel worse for the people that are actually trying to foster relationships because they're just going to end up getting hurt more in the end. Overall though, people are just used to finding their potential relationships through apps, and it's made in-person typical meeting places like a bar feel more like an awkward middle school dance sometimes. It's more often than not that we're being rejected or ghosted on dating apps unless you're really really hot, but I'm not talking about you guys right now. So it makes sense when we try dating in real life, we have the expectation going into it that we're gonna get rejected or ghosted because that's what we're used to in the dating world. I don't think that's the case though necessarily. I mean, obviously you have to like figure out the vibe of a situation before you approach someone, but sometimes you'll find that people are willing to talk and have a conversation, because if everyone is so lonely now, it should just incentivize people to get out there and actually make real life connections. Now that I've done my rambling, I guess I just have like a few more thoughts. The thing about growing up is that you can never go back. I can't go back to yesterday. I'll never be able to go back to this moment that I'm filming this video right here, right now. And that's terrifying, but it's also what makes life so great. Being in my 20s, while it's filled with anxiety every day and feeling like nothing I'm doing is going right, it's also a sign that I'm growing. It's comforting to know that every bad day, week, month will eventually come to an end. And it's not like I won't continue to have bad days when I get older, but going through life now in my 20s is just preparing me so I can better handle my hard times in the future. I know someday I'll look back on this time with kindness, and that I wasn't dumb or bad at life, but I was just scared and confused and I hadn't done it yet. Every time before your 20s when you're scared, you're able to run home. But what happens when you don't really have a home anymore, in the metaphorical sense? But it's the idea that for the first time in your life, you are completely on your own. No one is coming to save you, so you have to learn to save yourself. And then you get comfortable with it, and I think that's where the magic happens in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, is that you find your new home, whether that be a spouse, a child, or like a really good group of friends. I'm hopeful that this time in my 20s, while it is super overwhelming and it feels kind of like we're going woo, when it comes to progress in this world, I still feel hopeful that in the future I'll be able to find my new home and my new community, and that in the future I will actually have things to be nostalgic for.